Donald Trump announced his plan to host a UFC fight on the White House grounds for next year's 4th of July. Now, I have no idea if this is actually going to happen, if this is like a realistic event that the UFC could pull off, but I did think it would be fun to go through and make my own potential card for what would obviously be a monumental event for the UFC. So I'm going to be running through 15 different matchups. There's going to be at least one American in every single fight. I also gave like a guaranteed spot to the 3 active veterans who are on the UFC roster. That would be Neil Magny, Jared Cannonier, and Matt Frivola. I do think if you've served the country, 4th of July event at the White House, you should be on this card. And then overall, just trying to make some fun matchups here. Now let's start off with the main event. And I've seen 2 main fights kind of get thrown out there as potential options. You have Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, and then you have John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. I think Conor McGregor and John Jones have both kind of made some comments that like they'd be interested in competing, at this potential event. I kind of feel like both of these are unrealistic, in part because both of those 2 big names, like the A side of both of those matchups, are very, very unreliable. And then also, like, I know Donald Trump is like very locked into the UFC and all this stuff, but like, I just don't know if you really want the circus that comes with both Conor McGregor and John Jones at the White House. And then you also run the risk of like this huge monumental event ending with an Irishman, knocking out an American, or an Englishman knocking out an American in John Jones. And so I kind of feel like they're going to want an American versus American main event. The problem with that is that we don't have any current American champions. And so I just don't think there's a clear main event. I'm kind of just going to throw out a main card. And then I think we hope within the next year, if this does happen, that a clear main event kind of presents itself. But starting off with the main card, going to go with Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett. We have USA versus England. I do think this is a fight that could potentially happen before next July. But who knows what happens with that title picture at lightweight. Does Paddy have to pick up another fight before he gets the title shot, or is he just going to like walk into a shot versus Ilia Topuria? But on paper, it's a super fun fight. Both very dangerous, exciting fighters. I think there could be some risk of Gaethje retiring before this fight actually takes place, but like I think this opportunity would be big enough where he would be willing to fight on this card, and I do think that could, convince him to potentially prolong his career. Then the next matchup, also at lightweight, we have Max Holloway versus Dan Hooker. I just think this fight is a guaranteed banger. I think it has fight of the year potential. Also like a relevant contender matchup at 155. So that fight would obviously be fireworks. I think it would be great for this potential event. Then the first American versus American fight, I have Sean O'Malley versus Corey Sandhagen. Now, I guess this could have main event potential if Corey Sandhagen takes the belt off Merab. Don't think that's super likely, but like, never say never, and could be a potential headlining fight. These are just 2 of the best strikers in the UFC. This is a fight that I've wanted to see for a while. I think the fans have wanted to see this one for a while. It seems like it has to happen at some point. This would obviously be an awesome stage for that fight to take place on. Then we have one of 2 women's fights here, and I'm going to say the rematch between Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes. I think these 2 are going to fight sometime early on in 2026. Now, this is obviously assuming Kayla wins the first matchup. So if she wins the first fight, I do think Nunes would want and would receive an immediate rematch. And I think if we're picking like one women's fighter who would be like the women's MMA representative, it should be Kayla Harrison, proud American, defending the belt in a rematch against Amanda Nunes. I think that would be reasonable to be on the main card. And then the final fight here I have on the main is Brandon Royval taking on Kai Kara France, the rematch. Now, realistically, they're probably not going to put a flyweight fight on the main event just because there's a lot of disrespect towards that weight class. But Brandon Royval always delivers. I'd love for him to get rewarded with a big-time spot like this. The first fight between these 2 was an absolute banger. 2 guys who'll go out there, stand and bang, both dangerous in the flyweight weight class. So I do think that would be a fun fight to have on the main card. Now looking at the prelims here, the first set of 5, going to start off with Henry Cejudo taking on Peyton Talbot. Now this would be assuming that Talbot picks up like one more big win, before a year from now. And I do think the UFC is going to give him that push. It seemed like they were really behind him. Then they gave him like a pretty tough matchup against another legit prospect. he passed that test. I think he's going to get back in the good graces. And I know personally, like, I'm much higher on his ceiling after looking at the grappling improvements he made going into that Felipe Lima fight. Cejudo, I do think, is reasonable to be on this card. 1 gold for the USA. Hasn't won an MMA fight since 2020, so he probably has to fight back, potentially outside the rankings, give the prospect an opportunity to earn that spot. Cejudo versus Talbot, I think, would be a very interesting matchup. Then we have Joaquin Buckley versus Leon Edwards, USA versus England. 2 guys that were pretty thoroughly out-grappled in their last fights. Both guys who are primarily strikers. I feel like this is an interesting battle between like Leon's technique and then Buckley's just explosiveness, his overall physical power. Fun fight at welterweight. Another welterweight fight, we have Kevin Holland versus Colby Covington. Now, originally, I didn't know if I wanted to put Colby Covington on this card. I know he's the guy that's like always repping Donald Trump. I don't know if Trump's actually a huge fan of him. I feel like it's almost more embarrassing than it is like flattering from Colby to Trump. And so I considered leaving him off. I just didn't know if like people wanted to deal with the circus that is Colby Covington. But I think putting him up against another American is interesting. Kevin Holland's always game. I like him getting an opportunity on this big card. And so I think it's a fun fight. I think based on the rankings, it makes some sense. Colby should be fighting back. Kevin Holland super active. I think it's reasonable to give him, a shot up in the rankings. So Holland versus Covington, I think, is an interesting matchup. Then we have the first veteran matchup here with Jared Cannonier. I'm going to have him taking on Paulo Costa. Now, both these guys have fights coming up, so like the rankings could look different, a year from now. Cannonier's number 7, Costa's number 13. Cannonier taking on Michael Venom Page. Paulo Costa taking on Roman Kopylov. But I just think right now, looking at the rankings, they're somewhat close. Fun matchup. I think these guys are both going to go out there, stand and bang, super fun middleweight fight. Then going up to heavyweight, I'm going to have Derek Lewis taking on Mick Parkin. Derek Lewis obviously has that funny soundbite where he's talking about, Trump called him, told him to knock Volkov out because, the Russians were making him look bad on the news after that comeback win versus Volkov. So you have that callback, USA versus England. Derek Lewis is a fan favorite. I like him kind of getting a favorable matchup here in a big spot. So Derek Lewis versus Mick Parkin, I believe the only heavyweight fight I have here. Then I have Bo Nickel taking on Christian Leroy Duncan. I know some people are probably going to roll their eyes at Bo Nickel being on this card. If this fight card happens and it's 15 deep like I'm doing for this video, Bo Nickel will be on the card. Like I can almost guarantee it. He's golfed with Donald Trump, represents America. I think the UFC is still going to be very high on him. And then you have a USA versus England matchup, striker versus grappler here. Then we're going to go all the way down to bantamweight, where we have Malcolm Wellmaker taking on Davy Grant, another USA versus England matchup. You have Wellmaker, a very highly regarded prospect, giving him like a real veteran test against Davy Grant. And then stylistically interesting, 2 very solid strikers, Wellmaker versus Grant. And then we have the second women's fight here. Now, I don't think this needs to be on the card. I think they might want to have more than, one women's fight here. So we're going with Erin Blanchfield versus Tracy Cortez. USA versus USA. Potential interesting grappling match here. To be honest, there aren't a ton of like super high profile USA like women's fighters, like all the champs, Valentina, Zhang Weili, a lot of the top contenders not from America. So this could be a different matchup. I was thinking about Macy Barber, but she just hasn't been super reliable in terms of getting into the octagon. And then same thing with like a Rose Namajunas, but she's fought both of these women and like she beat Cortez, lost to Blanchfield. Don't know if you want to see like either of those actually happen again. So this is a potential fresh matchup. Then we have Matt Frivola taking on Jai Herbert. Frivola, an Army veteran, another USA versus England matchup. Frivola is always going to go out there and get in super fun fights. He is kill or be killed. I think this is a fun matchup here. And then the last fight here, I guess this is the prelim opener. Neil Magny taking on Jacoby Smith. Neil Magny also served in the Army. I think Jacoby Smith is a fun, undefeated prospect. This might seem mean, like feeding him to Neil Magny or feeding Neil Magny to him, but I do think he showed some potential weaknesses in his most recent fight against Nico Price, and Neil Magny's just kind of been like locked into this spot where he's going to take on these veterans. He's going to be the gatekeeper. Sometimes they get past him, like a Michael Morales. Sometimes he halts them, like a Mike Malott. That could be the case here with Jacoby Smith. But that is going to wrap it up for my 15 matchups. I guess the one main name that I left off that some people might be wondering about is Sean Strickland. I feel like there's a lot of reasons to leave him off this card. First off, he's just like a nightmare to deal with. I feel like he really would just be a PR nightmare for like the UFC and I guess just America in general here at the White House. Also, he's just not a fun fighter. Like, I think his style is very boring. And like what makes him somewhat interesting to fans is that he just says wild stuff. And I just don't know if that's what people want to deal with here for this card. And then I also felt like there wasn't a clear matchup for him here. So left off Sean Strickland. If you want to see him on here, you can drop it in the comments. But if I forgot about any matchups, you have some different ideas, let me hear it down below. But thank you all for stopping by. Let me know your thoughts on this card I put together, and I will see you guys in the next one.